We are filming. I just have your fingers because I know you don't like it the other way.
What are you doing here? Well, anyway, I don't know if this is for public or if this is just for Chip, but either way, I'll probably approach it the same way. So, this is one of our final steps we take in finishing our hats. You can see, Chip's is going to be a Lucas, so there is some shaping being done to it, but for the most part, this is towards the end of the hat. It's completely smooth in the crown, no bumps. There's a little bit of shape to the brim, but it was small enough that I could do it after I sewed in the band. Because sometimes it's good to get it sewed in earlier and let it sit a while to really get used to the shape of the hat. So yeah, once they get to this level, we fit our band in, and we like to let it sit on the block for at least half a day. Usually we try to shoot for letting them sit overnight. But, letting it sit really flattens out the band, it gets out any lumps, and it's especially important to keep this section flat and, even all the way around, because that's what I use to guide myself with my stitching. So, the way we start is we start in the back, which this chalk mark is here to really let us know that this is the exact back of the hat. So you can make sure that the band sits there and it's not sitting over here when the back of your head sits here. It could technically work, but it would just feel a little awkward and it doesn't look good. So, the first thing we do is I use my index finger to measure out an even side, because you want them to be even on this section and this section across where it's cut. So you'll take this and you'll go a little bit inward with your needle right next to your finger. And because this one had been pre-made and we redid it, there's a little more stiffener and it's a little harder to push the needle through sometimes. But you come to the outside, you see where your needle went through, and you'll go down about this far, and you'll go back through, and you go through the felt and the band this time. You pull through enough to leave a loop in the back. Sometimes I'll pull out a little extra once it's through. You go straight up from where the thread comes through the band to right about the edge of the sweatband. You go back through, and you'll see you're like right above that those first two holes. It doesn't have to be in an exact line, but you want it to be in the same place. So you'll pull through until you can feel the loop shortening on your thumb, and you want the end piece to be through too. You'll take your needle and you'll wrap it in the thread about 3 or 4 times. Then you'll push it down to the bottom and you'll pull through down to the hat, and then you'll pull it back this way. So now it's tied flat to the hat, and it really holds that section in place. So then you take your needle again, you go back through that top hole. Make sure you kind of angle what would be down into the hat a little. That way you know it's going through the band completely and not coming through a little higher up, because you don't want to cut the edge of the fabric with your needle. You'll hold all the way through so it's tight on the back and it's not looser than the other ones. Then you'll measure again on the second side with your index finger over the top of it. You'll go through at the same place, so you have a nice line that will hold the band together while you go around. And once again, you just measure down, go through. One thing you'll have to keep in mind is as you go, the end of your string will stay the same length, but the section that's attached to the hat will get shorter, so you'll have to pull your needle down the thread every now and then to make sure that it's not so close that it keeps, like, not pulling, being stuck in the hole. You want it to always go through, so it's always right. Then you go right back into that same hole like you did with the first one, trying to keep close to the edge, but like I said, don't get so close that you might cut the fabric, or it's not actually holding the band properly to the hat, because if it's just right on the edge with the fabric, it can rip and your band will come out and it essentially does nothing. And then I try to keep them about this length. If you're just starting to sew, I recommend doing them a little wider.
Kind of a finger width at that point.
Roughly a finger width. You don't want them too big, but it's a little easier in the start to have it a little wider. And sometimes you'll have to take your needle back out of the hole and kind of angle down a little more, just to make sure it's, like I said, completely in there. And you'll just keep pulling. And I think we should go to the first quarter to show them the tie off.
Okay.
So from here, again, it's just a basic stitch. You want to keep your stitches on the outside. On the upgrade bodies, we have to keep them a little bigger because, one, because they've been sanded, they're thinner. And two, usually they've had sweatbands already in them before. So you have to make sure you're not going so short with those original stitch holes that they'll break through the hat. So roughly, I'd say that's, what, like 1/8 of an inch? Maybe a little less? Within like 1/8 to a 16th too small. Let's say 1/8. And as long as you keep your needle at the same level as where the string comes out before it, it should be fairly easy to keep it even. But it also depends on how you're angling your needle when you go into the hat. In my opinion, the hardest thing about learning to sew on a hat isn't just the stitching itself. It's more so learning how to hold the hat as you go around. Because it's a not natural setting for your hand. Of, like, holding with your thumb all the way out and kind of angling and making sure everything's right.
Yes, it used to make my hand cramp.
It still does sometimes. On a day where I have, like, 10 over here or more that I'm sewing in, and I'm just going back to back, it can be very... It's more so worse for my hand that's holding the needle, because it's...
Pinching the needle.
Yeah, it's pinching the entire time.
Mm-hmm. My thumb always cramped from holding the brim out. But then lately, sometimes I get the pinch cramp. But not very often, because you do more of the sewing now.
Yeah.
Because, folks, this girl is precise in her sewing.
And it's also important to not try to rush, especially if you're just starting. Because unless you're very familiar with hand sewing, you're not going to be some secret savant at hand sewing. You're going to have to take your time. And if you get too rushed, you can start getting it wrong. And that can lead to you panicking. And you start trying to overcorrect, or your brain can't understand, like, this is where it wants to go. It's just a lot you have to learn of, like, fine-tuning. One of my stitches looked a little longer, but not enough, I think, to justify it.
So if you have a stitch that's crooked, what do you do?
I can go ahead and show that real quick. So what you'll have to do is you'll have to take your needle off of your thread, which at the start can be a pain because it's going to be a long string, which we cut ours a little longer so that once I come back through here, there's enough left that she can just pull it through and use it to finish sewing up the back.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it's so long. And then what you'll do is, this is the last stitch I did. I will take, not the sharp end, the eye of my needle, and you slide it under the thread, and you pull it out through that hole. And sometimes, if this part of the stitch is sitting right and it's angled down, you can just take it out through there.
Mm-hmm.
But if not, you'll have to go to the outside and
take that one.
It's easier on these sanded bodies because like I said, the felt's very flat. But if you're doing an especially woolly body, or it's just isn't as finely felted as others,
mm-hmm.
it can get kind of lost in there. So you have to just kind of slowly dig it out with your eye, and then pull through again. And when you go back in, you want to go again through that same hole, because you don't want to have a bunch of extra holes in your hat, but you just have to figure out, do I need to angle my needle more up or more down? And it's also important, you may want to put your stitches a little lower because it gives you more clearance in terms of what I said about cutting the fabric on the end or it not sitting properly. But you don't want to go so low, because if there's so much extra at the top and it's being taken on and off the block, it can fold that part of the sweatband down.
Or as the person puts it on their head.
Yeah, that's most likely what will happen. But
so yeah, you want it up as close to the edge as you can, but still gripping through the totality of your sweatband.
And then again, it's just as you go, you'll learn to really get a feel for it. And sometimes your string will just kind of, not knot, but it'll get woven together in a bunch. And it's usually because the end piece of the string is like wrapping around the loop. Okay. So if you feel resistance as you're pulling through, don't try to just yank it, because then the string can knot and you have to cut it out and start over. Or at least back to the section you last tied off at, which I'll show tying off in a second. Another thing you'll notice as you go is you can tell if... What I like to do is I'll hold the inside with my first two fingers to really make sure the sweatband is flat against the hat. It stops it from pushing out, which can make the rest of it uneven. And as it goes through, if you feel it kind of pushing between your fingers, it means you're pushing too high to the edge of the sweatband. As I've said, it's just a lot of things you'll learn as you do it, and it's more fine-tuning. And the way I hold it might not even be the exact way that works for you. It's very much like the rest of this business, where there's the base knowledge, but the rest is figuring out how things work best for the way you move or you think. Which is why some people will come to us either on our YouTube or in person, and they'll come in thinking this is like a mechanical job where there's one set way you do things and you have to follow that to the T of like rules. But it's more so there is the technical knowledge you need of like what hats should look like, how to work with certain tools. But most of it really is just actually getting in there and learning how things feel comfortable with the way you work them.
So, when hats are made with a machine stitch to stitch the sweatband in, it's sewed around to from end to end. Why do we knot them off on quarters?
One, a lot of industrial stitchers can use much thicker thread, so there's a lot less likelihood of it breaking, so they don't necessarily have to worry about, oh, will this become unraveled? But also, since we're sewing by hand, we're not necessarily doing a more intense stitch. We can't stitch as closely. Our stitches just don't match the intensity of, a mechanical stitcher. So what we have to do is every quarter of the hat, we stop and do a knot. That way, if it breaks in one section, it'll only go so far to where it's knotted, and your whole sweatband won't come out.
So this actually is better than one that's done in mechanically, because as we have learned, when you go to take a mechanically sewn sweatband out, it just basically, you cut one stitch and it's gone.
They do
So.
pull very well. But they, again, it is a different stitching where it just kind of go back.
Uh-huh.
So the likelihood of it breaking normally is a little less than the way we stitch, but if it does break, it will come
Yeah,
out.
so yeah, I see what you're saying. The likelihood of a mechanically stitched is less of breaking.
But if it does...
However, if it does,
that's
you've
what
lost your whole
Matt's
sweatband. So
And
on ours, the likelihood is slightly higher, but you will not lose your sweatband. It is like physically impossible for you to just wear through a stitch and lose a sweatband.
so what we do, when you go to tie your knot, I angle it down. Instead of going straight down, you angle it over and down roughly the same distance you would for those starting stitches when you come through the hat. And then once you're through, you're going to pull till you have that loop again.
When I do it, I always catch the loop on my thumb just to hold it.
Yeah, that's what I do too. And
Oh, yes, you're doing it. Yeah.
yeah, it just makes sure your thread doesn't go through because, like I said, with your needle you can pull it back out, but it's just a pain.
It's a pain in the butt.
So you'll see it's this far down, and I just go straight up, but I keep it a little smaller because you don't want it to be super obvious. It's not a problem that it's there. It's just
yeah, it's just at the end you kind of want it to be obvious, and at the sides you don't.
And your needle should be roughly at a point of like an equal triangle.
Okay.
It doesn't. Again, this doesn't have to be exact.
Let me zoom in this a little bit more.
Again, it doesn't have to be exact, but that's roughly the shape you should have with your points. And then again, wrap 3 times. And then I pull to the side first this way, and then you turn your hat and pull this way, so it fully tightens the knot.
So your technique on your knot is different than mine. So, but that's okay. That's where.
And like I said, that's just you find the things that work better. In
Exactly.
my experience, that tightens the knot insanely well.
Okay.
To pull it both sides because it picks up whatever slack the other side missed.
Okay.
And then you will match with that point where your needle came back through. And you'll go same distance out through the thing. And you keep on stitching. And you will do that at this point directly across from here. You'll do one directly across from here.
So at the front tip and on each side. Now when you made 2 knots at the beginning at the back. When you get all the way back around, do you make 2 more knots?
You will do the exact same thing that you did in the front, which it's very helpful because this essentially also works as a roadmap once you get back. Because on your last stitch, you'll make it to this point on top of the first line.
Uh-huh.
So you go back through there, back in here, through the bottom. You'll come back up through that hole, going right over that line. You'll do the loop. You go back through there again, across, same process.
Yeah. So you repeat that. And then the final stage is to do whatever type stitch that you use to close up your sweatband.
I would recommend, if you're just starting, doing simple X's. And you can, if you want to make them look a little more extra, you can do kind of an elongated bottom 2 points, shorter top.
Mm-hmm. What I would do is just look at some embroidery stitches. There's lots of little videos online that show, various styles of stitches.
Yeah, that wasn't to say you should never do fancy stitches.
Yeah.
Even we do a very kind of intricate, like, ladder stitch almost.
Mm-hmm.
But
And
when you're just starting, it's better to get a simple stitch you can repeat that is uniform.
yes.
And can be uniform across all your hats, because it may seem like a small detail, but over time those details can add up if you're not producing product that's the same quality in every aspect over time. Obviously, a stitch won't ruin your business, but it's just good practice to be like, I can do this. It'll
Consistent,
be uniform.
yes.
Consistency.
Uniform. Okay, well, thank you for sharing that today. And for now...